Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. Today's video is to ask the question of how different grips and positions and widths hit your back differently in rowing and in vertical pulling. Let's take a look. So first, rows. These are all generally, so there are definitely exceptions and your experience may be different, but on average, in most cases, there is a little bit of a difference between how narrow grip rows versus wide grip rows hit your back. Narrow grip rowing generally hits the lats proportionally more and other parts of the back a little bit less. Wide grips generally train the rhomboids and the mid-traps, kind of what some people call the upper back, a little bit more and the lats a bit less. But really the main factor here is how that grip position affects the lines of pull, specifically where your elbow goes. So that's actually the second part of rowing. The question here is, what is the effect of having your elbows flush to your sides when you're rowing versus up and out? Flush to the body trains more lats, it's directly in that line of pull, and up and out trains more rhomboids and mid-traps, quote unquote, upper back. Both positions train the rear delt similarly, and actually, I might say, quite well. So well, in fact, that I think, good God, I got something in my fucking eye, God damn it. Oh, I can see. Oh my God, I'm on camera. I'm not naked. Oh, well, it's not the dream I had last night. Scott, is it okay if I get naked? Yeah, show business, see? Rear delts are trained very well during back training, especially if you get that deep stretch. And a lot of people will train lots of rear delt work, lots of front delt work, and lots of side delt work. And I think most of those people are better served doing very little front delt work because all the chest pressing you're doing trains them very well. Very little rear delt isolation work because all the back work you're doing trains them very well. And then focusing mostly on side delts in their delt training, which is what I do in my program, what Jared Feather, IFB Pro does. And it seems to work really, really well. There are cases where you can specialize and focus on the rear and front delts, but back training of all kinds really trains the rear delts super, super well. And it doesn't much matter where your shit points. Next, more rowing variations and how they affect the back development. Whether you were rowing to your chest or if you were rowing to your hips, high row versus low row. Rowing to your hips generally trains the lats more. Rowing to your chest generally trains the rhomboids and mid-traps more, especially if, and usually because, when you low row, actually it works both ways. When you row low, you usually, because you're trying to go low, you push your elbows down and it ends up flushing your elbows to the sides. And when you're rowing high, imagine doing a high row, but with your elbows to the sides. What the fuck does that even look like? When you're rowing high, almost always you'll catch your elbows and pull up and out. So yes, rowing to the hips hits the lats more, rowing to the chest and higher hits the upper back a bit more, but mostly that's an artifact of where your elbows end up going. So the real critical thing to understand here is elbows in and flush, more lats. Elbows up and out, more rhomboids, teres major, mid-traps, lower traps, quote-unquote upper back. Lastly, for rowing is the question of overhand versus neutral versus underhand position. For back activation and growth, it seems to me, my best guess, is that there are actually no big differences here. Mostly these things end up being a proxy for elbow position anyway. Overhand grip means more flared elbows in most cases. Neutral automatically brings your elbows in most cases flush to your sides, and thus neutral is more for lats, but it's not the neutrality of it, because if you take a close grip on a row, you can still push your elbows in just as much. Neutral grip kind of guarantees that, but an overhand grip can still hit your lats exactly as much as a neutral grip will. And underhand typically also lets you bring your elbows in more naturally. So really, it's just about elbow position in most cases and not about which grip you take. So if you're like wondering if you want to hit your lats more or kind of your upper back more, and you're like, ooh, should I do overhand or neutral or underhand grip for rowing? It just doesn't seem to matter much, which really is another way of saying that there's kind of no wrong answers and do whatever you want. As long as your elbows are flush to your sides, you're hitting lots of lats. And if your elbows are up and out, you're going to be hitting less lats and more of what many people would call your upper back, though I always thought the lats were part of the upper back. What the fuck do I know? Now, next part, second part of the video, vertical pulling. Okay, pull-ups, assisted pull-ups, pull-downs, etc. Narrow grips allow you to stretch the lats more at the top. And because that stretch is so muscle growth promoting, narrower grip vertical pulling generally trains the lats a little bit more. Wider grip is okay for variation and to get good at wider grip, but Too wide a grip means most of the muscles of the back don't get a very good stretch anymore, especially the lats, and I think it's just a net negative. So what I would say another way is you can totally use wide grip vertical pulling for variation, just if it feels good, good stimulus to fatigue ratio, but unless you're compelled to do that, I would say medium and closer grip on vertical pulling generally trains the lats and really most of the back a little bit better than wider grip on average. Next is elbows flush to the side or out. I think there aren't any huge differences as long as the elbows point towards the hips at the bottom. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if you bring your elbow down in front of you and then it points down to the hip at the bottom, you're hitting a lot of lats and a lot of back. If you bring your elbows out from the sides and arc, but the arc ends up not going back to like behind you, but all the way down to still point to your hips, you're still getting an unbelievable back and lat stimulus. So the good news here is that because both elbows out and elbows flush hit the back and lats very similarly in vertical pulling, if you bring the elbows to point down to your hips at the very end and then arc whichever way you want, be it up or be it forward, it's easy to just use them both as excellent variations. So you can use one variation for a while. It gets a little stale on you, you switch to another one. No big deal. For me, if I keep my elbows flush, it does seem to hit the lats a little bit more, but I don't think that's a dependable thing. I would say works for everyone. Try it yourself. Let us know in the comments which one seems to work a little better for you. But remember, something working a little better doesn't mean it's better forever. If you prefer pasta versus rice 60% of the time, that doesn't mean you never eat rice again. That means you might eat pasta more often, but at some point your girlfriend's like, hey, do you want to do Italian? And you're like, let's do Chinese, man. I'm feeling some rice. And she's like, I thought you don't like rice. You're like, I like pasta better, but you get sick of everything. So just the same way, if you're doing a lot of neutral grip pulling with your elbows flush, yeah, it's great. But at some point you're going to get like some dings and wears and tears and the fatigue is going to summate and you're going to have a situation where it's just stale and you're going to want to do some maybe wider grip work, maybe with your elbows coming out, and it's still excellent back work. It's going to work super well for you. A couple months later, you're like, ooh, I missed the neutral grip shit, and you're going to go back to that. Next variation in vertical pulling is where to pull. Do you pull somewhere to roughly the clavicle area, or do you pull down to the nipple line? Which is a fun thing to say in most contexts. I've actually said the word nipple line in a formal university class of dozens of students as we're learning about training technique. And I swear to God, every time you say this in public, at least one person, you can tell them trying to squash the biggest giggle of their life. You're like, and the nipple line, you look around the room and some guy's like, you're like, really, Jim? What part of that is funny to you? Nipples? Nipples are hilarious. They're just this huge comedy trope. Jim, why don't you stand up and tell us a story about nipples and why they're hilarious? Of course, at that point, I think you're technically harassing your students, maybe even sexually. That's why I got fired from the university. No, wait, it was for something else. Never can tell. In any case, clavicles versus nipple line. Where to pull, because it's going to feel a little bit different. I don't think that there is a huge difference. Which one you pull to is just variation. So sometimes you pull to the nipple line for a while and that feels really great. Then it feels a little stale. You start pulling to the clavicle so you can maintain a more vertical posture. It feels great. I don't think there's any wrong answers there. Lastly, for vertical pulling, what's the difference between overhand, neutral, and underhand grips? I think, again, it's just a matter of how this affects elbow position. If you pull vertically overhand and your elbows end up kind of behind you at the bottom, not going to be as much work for your lats and more for your upper back. Whereas if you pull overhand, but you make sure to really drive your elbows down to your hips, then it really isn't much different or different at all than a neutral grip or an underhand grip. But in most cases, a neutral grip or a close underhand grip will promote your elbows going down to your hips anyway, and thus probably hit the lats a little better. Now, I love overhand pull-ups. They are my favorite type of pull-up by a mile, and I get the craziest stimulus to fatigue ratios for them. So I can tell you this, even though overhand pulling is by a small margin a little bit more challenging way to which to hit the lats, and neutral and underhand puts you in a slightly predetermined better position for that. For me and for many others, even still, overhand pull-ups and pull-downs are still my best choice. They're still the best SFR for me. So what I'm saying is here, there are these margins that are like, by a really small margin on average for people, neutral grip and underhand might promote slightly better lat growth. But there are more exceptions than there are rules in this case. And at the end of the day, the stimulus to fatigue ratio you feel, how pumped the lats are getting, how pumped your back is getting, how tired it's getting, how sore it's getting, how much stronger you're getting over time versus how much it hurts the joints and how tough it feels. If you get all the right answers, just follow what your personal SFR is. If it starts to degrade and go stale, switch grips, switch exercises, find whatever works best for SFR, cook that for a few weeks, few months. When it gets stale, you just repeat the process and continue. So, to wrap up this video, the TLDR here is this. Back growth is much simpler than many people would have you believe. Now, some people have trouble connecting with their back. They have trouble connecting with their lats. The traditional exercises don't seem to work well for them. In that case, go give Cassim Hansen a follow on Instagram. I think he has a YouTube too. And he'll teach you all the CAS bullshit, which is a term I came up with, ironically. And it's all this great exercises that are very one arm specific, kind of reach around, pull around type of stuff. And it really lets you develop an awesome mind muscle connection with especially your lats and other parts of your back as well on occasion. Some folks may really benefit from that stuff. But most people will do amazingly well with back work of every single different kind of variety. So what I'll say this to you is two things. If you're a beginner, intermediate, do all the grips that you think are fun and you think are cool to try. Do all the different positions. Pull high, pull low, pull to nipples, pull to clavicle, underhand, overhand, neutral. It's all right answers. You just use all the variations, your back is going to get big. As you get more advanced, you may notice that some of those lines of pull are better for you than others, and then definitely make more inroads on the ones you feel the most benefit from. And if you're struggling with the traditional exercises and you've already mastered what you think is a very good technique, try some unconventional exercises that someone like Cassim Hansen can teach you. In that case, you might be able to really work on those exercises, really get some great gains, and then maybe take your newfound mind-muscle connection and be like, oh my God, I can now do pull-ups way more productively because I know what it's like to feel a lat contraction. Give that some thought. Let us know in the comments what your experiences are with your own back training, which grips and positions and pulling angles you have found to be best for you, and maybe I'll get in there and comment, and maybe I'll just look at the comments and just watch, and he listens, and he waits, and he never comments because he's so sly. Yeah. I'm fucking weird. All right, I'll go be weird somewhere else. See you guys next time.